So in college, my faith really became my own for the very first time. I fell in love with Jesus. I was filled with this passion. I exuded passion. I wanted to tell everyone I met about Jesus. I wanted to read the Bible all day. And my spiritual life was up and to the right. It was fireworks all the way. It was extraordinary. So in my passion, I would sit down with my journal and furiously write down in my journal all my good intentions. Like, I'm going to pray for 2 hours a day, and I'm going to read the entire Bible this month, and I'm going to tell everybody about Jesus. And for a few days, it worked. For a few days, I was riding high, but then somehow I would start to slide into apathy. Things would get choked out with busyness. I'd become busy, distracted, whatever, but I would start to slide down until I stopped caring and eventually fell into sin, some gross sin. But the thing is, my heart wasn't passionately following Jesus at that point. So what would happen is I would eventually just kind of revel in it for a while and go down and down and down until I hit rock bottom. And then finally I would read a passage from the Bible or meet a friend or go to a church service or go to some conference or something would happen, and I would realize, what have I done? What have I become? And conviction, guilt, shame, all of that would pour into my heart. And I would weep, I would cry, I would be so sad. I would promise God, I'm never going to do this again. I don't want to be like this. This is not right. So I would sit down with my journal and I would start journaling out, God, I'm going to change. I'm going to be different. I'm going to start reading my Bible every day and praying for 2 hours and telling everyone about Jesus. And before I knew it, I was right back to where I started, and I was passionately loving Jesus again. And then I started falling into apathy until I go into gross sin, and then I'd revel in it for a while, and then I'd hit a point where I'd repent, and I would go back again and again. So I still remember the day. I was 20, 21, something like that, and once again, I was pulling out my journal. I was getting ready to write in it, God, I'm going to be different this time, but before I did that, I thought, hey, wait a minute. This feels familiar. So I pulled out my journals from previous years, and as I sat there, I started reading through them, and I noticed these exact same sentiments, this exact same cycle again and again and again, over and over. So on the one hand, I found it fascinating. Like, this cycle revealed something deep within me, something about the way I approached life and saw the world. Without even trying, I had followed this pattern over and over again without noticing something I could go through. Sometimes I could go through a cycle not just in a month or a week, but sometimes I would go through an entire cycle in just a weekend. So on the one hand, I found it fascinating. On the other hand, I found it utterly defeating. I felt stuck. I felt lost. The proverb came to mind, as a dog returns to his vomit, so a fool returns to his folly. And that's how I felt. Like, why even try? I can't break out of this. So let me say 2 words before we continue. From this distance, looking back on my younger self, first is this. There are all kinds of things wrong with this pattern, with this thinking. This cycle is fueled by wrong thinking, wrong motivations, and copious amounts of guilt and shame that don't do anything to help you discover what Jesus meant when he said, "Come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest." So that's the first thing. There's all kinds of things wrong with it. And the second is this. If you've watched your own life closely, if you've read your own journals, chances are, as much as you know this is messed up, it probably feels familiar. If you can relate, today's for you. It's for those of us who've been caught in a self-destructive cycle, who felt like we cannot break out of sinful patterns, who feel defeated, who've given up on any real change in life, who feel stuck repeating the same patterns of sin again and again and again. So what I'm about to say is going to sound a little bit outrageous, but I believe it to the soles of my feet, and it's this. Judges chapter 2 has the potential to be life-changing. Second only to Romans 6, 7, 8, it is one of the most helpful, most practical chapters in all of the scriptures for those of us who are desperate to break out of the cycles of sin and self-destruction. Through this chapter, we begin to get a picture of our own hearts. Questions like, why do I feel this constant draw towards apathy and sin? Why does my love for God seem to fade so quickly? Why do I keep falling into a place of despondency and depression or anxiety or shame? Why do we so often have a battle raging in our own souls? Why can't I break out of this cycle? Judges chapter 2, starting in verse 6, reads like this. After Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each to their own inheritance. Now, if you've been following along this series, you already know this. In fact, the narrator is directly repeating what he already told us in chapter 1. But this is more than mere repetition. This go-round, chapter 2, he's going to move into some deep spiritual insights. So Judges chapter 1 is a journal entry of the history of the Israelites. Judges chapter 2 is the narrator sitting back and reading through the journal over year after year after year of living in this cycle and starting to see the underlying patterns. Do you get it? Verse 7. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and the elders who outlived him, who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. So we're in this pattern right off the bat. We see that in the first generation, things were up and to the right. During the time of Joshua, during the time when the people lived and saw the great things the Lord had done, things were good. But the question comes up immediately, what happens when they all die? What happens when Joshua is gone? What happens when no one is around who saw the great things of the Lord? Skipping down to verse 10, we see, after that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who neither knew the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Now we have to say, it is highly unlikely that these people did not literally know who God was, did not literally know the stories of creation, Exodus, wandering in the wilderness, and the like. They knew. But there are different ways of knowing something. So, you might know the neuroscience of falling in love. You might know that there are certain neuromodulators like dopamine and oxytocin and vasopressin that functionally crank up the levels of trust and decrease our ability to think critically, creating that falling in love sensation. You might know all about the biomedical process of falling in love, but if you've never experienced what it feels like when you say, I can't feel my face when I'm with you, but I love it. If you haven't experienced that feeling, you do not yet know what it means to fall in love. In verse 10, we are not talking about just a head knowledge. We are talking about a covenantal knowledge, a relational knowledge, as in Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived. If you do not know God personally, subjectively, in a trusting, self-giving relationship, then you don't know God. Knowing facts about God is not good enough. James famously puts it in James chapter 2. You believe that there is one God. Good! Even the demons believe that and shudder. Knowing the facts about God is not enough to make you into a child of God. That's enough to make you into a demon. If you want to be a child of God, you have to know Him covenantally. You have to give yourself in relationship to Him. It's like marriage. So you can date and flirt and mess around and start living together and even have babies. All you want. But if you want to be man and wife till death do us part, if you want the two to become one flesh, then you have to take vows. You need to swear an oath before God and these witnesses to give yourself to one another. That's a covenantal knowing. So after Joshua dies, an entire generation arises that wants to keep their options open. They aren't ready to break up with God yet, but they aren't ready to swear an oath to commit either. They're like, let's be friends with benefits. And to put it mildly, things go downhill from there. There is a Chernobyl-style meltdown from one generation to the next, and we read about it starting in verse 11. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals, or Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them up out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the people around them. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and Ashtoreths. So, what happens? They go from one generation serving the Lord to the next generation falling into sin and then reveling in it, completely reveling in it. One of the great truths of Scripture is that humans cannot not worship something. Humans cannot not worship something. Of course, I don't mean, that agnostics or atheists, those who don't believe in Jesus, anyone, I'm not suggesting that they go off to pagan shrines or secretly sacrifice goats in their backyard. That's not it. Here's what I mean. In the early Iron Age, someone would literally sacrifice their children in order to serve Baal and get ahead in their career. In today's world, people still sacrifice their family for their career, but we don't call it being an idolater and tell them to repent. We call this being a workaholic and tell them to read a book on work-life balance. It is the exact same problem, different language. So the two leading gods that we're going to have to get to know for the book of Judges, the two leading gods at this time among the Canaanites, much like today, were the gods of money and fertility. The first one is this guy, Baal or Baal. Here's three different pictures of him. In his right hand there, he would have been holding a club in one where he's defeating the forces of chaos, Yam, the sea monster. And the other two, he would have been holding a lightning bolt. Why? Because he is the god of the thunderstorm. He hurls lightning bolts. He is the God, his name literally means Lord or Master, and he is a warrior king who rides on a thunderstorm, hurling lightning bolts. He is one bad dude. The other one is Astarte, here referred to as Ashtoreth. She is the goddess of fertility, as her picture might suggest, and she is the consort, which means queen, or probably more like baby mama of Baal. Now, notably, on this lovely lady here, the author of this text misspells her name. Her name is Ashtart, and he spells her Ashtoreth. Now, scholars believe that this is an intentional misspelling of her name. Here, the author appears to have taken the goddess's name and smashed it together with the Hebrew word for shame, Bosheth. So this, in a modern equivalent, would be like prior to Tom Brady going to the Buccaneers, there was a popular name for the Buccaneers. They were called the Succaneers. There is no confusion over what their real name is. Rather, the author, in those cases, is making a point. That's what's happening in this text, but I digress. The point is this: when these two came together, when Baal and Ashtart came together, when they get intimate, he makes it rain, and she makes cattle and people and everything have babies. This is how you get wealthy. This is how your life gets security. So Canaanite worship involved going up to high places where the gods could get a good view of you, and you enact what you want them to do. Notice in the text, too, you'll see that they use a plural. They refer to Baals and Ashtoreths. It's not because they believed in multiple Baals or multiple Ashtoreths, but there were multiple expressions, it was a multi-site church back in the day. So these were the Dunkin' Donuts of the ancient world. They were literally on every corner. The world runs on Dunkin'. That's the idea of this text. That's what it means when it says, they followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. That's what it means. Now, before we move ahead, I would be remiss if I did not point out the vast, complete, utter, unreconcilable, categorical differences between the Canaanite gods and the God of the Israelites, between Canaanite worship and the worship of God's people. The Canaanites worshipped immoral, petty, lustful, fickle gods, gods of the economy, of pregnancy, of personal happiness, of jobs, of security, of things that are constantly in flux and can fall apart in a second, as 2020 so helpfully illustrated for us. In contrast, the Israelites worshipped Yahweh, the great I Am, the Creator God. There is no comparison, none. There is none like you, as the psalmist says. So to be fair, it doesn't seem like any of God's people just were ready to outright reject Yahweh and follow the Canaanites exclusively. Nobody was ready to say, I choose my career and my kids over Yahweh. And that's what makes this so pernicious. The great temptation of the Israelites was not to reject Yahweh, but to keep worshiping Yahweh and add in a bit of Canaanite worship. To keep going to church and serve the gods of career, fertility, security, wealth. To come to church on Sunday and passionately recite the creed, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then go home and passionately seek the things that everyone else seeks with all your heart. Seek a career, seek your kids, seek houses, security, personal happiness. Here's the thing. A good relationship with God, like a good marriage, demands exclusivity. So when I was in Dallas, I led a 20-somethings ministry, and there's this young guy showed up to the ministry and started just dove in and started loving Jesus, loving the church, reading everything I could give him to read. It was great. And then one day I learned that he was still a practicing Hare Krishna. That on Sundays, he would come to our church and he would worship Jesus and he would join in our Bible studies and he would read his Bible. But then on Wednesdays, he would go to his temple in Dallas, a place literally filled with idols. Here's a picture from their temple. He would literally go there and offer up prayers to idols. So one day, I take him out for lunch and I explained to him as lovingly but as clearly as I could, hey, Jesus demands exclusivity. He does not want to fit into your pantheon. It's Jesus or the other gods. It's Jesus or the pantheon. But here's the thing. He looked at me and refused to believe it. He was quite certain that he could worship both Jesus and his idols, and it was okay. He chose both. It blew my mind. I was like, how can he do this? But then it hit me. How easy is it for us to feel quite certain that we can worship Jesus and pursue a career and live a great life and have a perfect family and a perfect neighborhood and seek security and personal happiness? How easy is it for us to pursue the Christian dream and the American dream at the same time? Now, I might not name the spiritual powers behind these things, behind money, wealth, fertility, success, kids, but it doesn't mean that I'm not tempted to worship them. So when God's people give their heart to another God, when you and I give our heart to another God, the Lord gets angry. Look back at the end of verse 12 and 13. It says, they aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and Ashtoreths. God gets angry. If you want to understand Judges, you have to understand this. If you want to know God covenantally, if you want to give your life to him, you have to appreciate what's going on here. There are many, many today well-meaning, psychologically trained Christians who say, you must never think of God as angry. And in one sense, I want you to hear me, they're right. So theologically, if you've accepted Jesus' death on your behalf, God sees you in Christ, and when he sees you, he sees Christ, and he says over you, this is my beloved child, in whom I am well pleased. God says those words over you if you've given your life to Christ. This is because of what the Apostle Paul calls our part of our justification. By grace alone, because of Christ alone, nothing we did, we are declared righteous. We are loved by God because of Christ. So that's true theologically. Now, psychologically, if you only picture God as an angry father, then you are going to have a terrible relationship with God and a terrible life. It's true. So theologically, psychologically, you should be careful if you think of God as angry, but. Before we flush or avoid all the passages about God being angry, and there are many, I have a quick question for you. Have you ever been deeply frustrated with someone you love deeply? So I want you to see, in our own experience, all of us can say that it's possible to love someone and be angry, that the two are not opposites, right? In fact, it's been said that the opposite of love is not hate, but apathy. So if I truly love my wife, then I'm going to be justified in hating anything that separates us, that gets between our relationship. If I truly love my son, then I'd be justified in hating anything that enslaves his soul or hurts him. If I truly love my daughter, then I'd be justified in hating all teenage boys. That's a little bit far, but you get the idea. Hate might sound strong, but if you've ever seen someone you love get destroyed, be enslaved, be bound up, be hurt, then you know it might be too honest, but it's not too strong. So in Exodus chapter 34, right after God expresses how much he loves his people, his deep, deep love and faithfulness to the people, that he's giving himself to the people, I will be your God, you will be my people. Right after he declares his depth of love for them, we read in Exodus chapter 34, verse 14, do not worship any other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. So at home, we have a pillow. It says God is love on it, but I've never seen a pillow with God is jealous on it. Hebrew scholars point out that this is a pretty terrible translation, though. The English word jealous, to quote Daniel Block, is both inadequate and misleading. It connotes possessiveness, insecurity, pettiness, envy, and the like, and God is none of these things. In the Hebrew, the word is kana, that suggests a fierce love. Not pettiness, not envious, not covetous, none of those. It's a fierce love. It's a mama bear when you threaten her cub. It's a father when you threaten his family. It's the love of a God who hates anything that will enslave or destroy you. And that anger, that fierce love pulsates through these pages. Back in Judges 2, verse 14. In his anger, in his fierce love against the Israelites, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. They were in distress. I want you to see what happens next in the stage. They come to a point where their sin catches up with them and they are crashing down. They are weeping. They go, as we saw in the text a couple weeks ago, they go to Bakah, to this place of weeping. Ironically, I want you to hear this. Ironically, one of the evidences that you are truly a child of God is that when you choose to live in sin, God makes you miserable. One of the evidences that you are truly a child of God is that sin becomes miserable. And here God's people become absolutely miserable. Verse 16 we read, Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders, yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshipped them. They quickly turned from the ways of their ancestors who had been obedient to the Lord's command. Do you hear the metaphor in there? They prostituted themselves. They didn't just cheat on God. They sold their very selves in order to get that job, to get their kids into that school, to live in that neighborhood, to have that kind of retirement, to have that kind of security in life. They cried out from pain, but they never really changed. Verse 18, the text finishes like this: whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people returned to ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. They are caught in a self-destructive cycle. So, for a time, a judge comes, saves them. They experience peace and life and joy with the Lord. But then they drift off in apathy. They worship the Baals and Ashtoreths and fall into sin, become apathetic, fall into gross sin. And then finally they hit rock bottom. They groan, they cry out in their distress. They weep over their sins. God sends a Savior, a deliverer, a Savior who comes, rescues them, and then they go into a time of peace. But after that judge dies, they fall back into apathy and back into sin again and again and again. So they love God, sure, but there are so many other gods crying out for their attention, so many other gods demanding their allegiance, so they try to do both. They try to serve God and their career, God and get the house and the spouse and the kids and the job and the vacation and the titles and the security and everything they want. But eventually things go too far and they find themselves enslaved. And that's the word, enslaved to those things, to those gods. And the things get worse and worse and worse until one day they reach a breaking point. And they start the cycle all over again. Is it just me, or does this feel familiar? So this chapter is interesting. It gives us this deep understanding of the cycle, the pattern of sin that was true of God's people 3,000 years ago, and it's true of God's people today. But notably, there are no direct answers. Rather, it helps us ask better questions. Questions that might help us understand our own hearts. Questions that might help us see the underlying patterns in our lives. Questions that might help us break out of self-destructive cycles we find ourselves slipping into again and again. For example, how might you be tempted to serve both God and lesser gods? Gods of career, money, family, security, personal happiness, whatever. Personally, I am tempted to serve the gods of achievement. These gods, they promise great things. It makes other people value me. But these gods, they demand total allegiance. They want my time, my energy, my passion. And if I give those to them, then they will demand my very children, my family. They are terrible gods. Here's the question. Can you name the gods who still have influence in your life? The gods of fear, lust, control, anger, guilt, shame are some of the most prevalent gods in our world today. The calling card of these gods, like it was 3,000 years ago, the calling card of these gods is slavery. They seek to enslave you. So here's the question. Where do you feel enslaved to others, to expectations, to false narratives, to your own desires? Where do you feel like you cannot escape? Like you have to do this, like you can't get out of this, like you can't change, you're stuck. Your behavior's already decided for you. This is where you will most likely find your false gods. Let me just say, if you cannot name your false gods, the ones that tempt you, you are either A, a perfect saint, or B, you don't know what's going on in your own soul. Maybe it's time to read your own journals. Maybe it's time to study your own life and the patterns in your life. Question number 3, what are the signs that you might be slipping into a self-destructive cycle? What are the signs that you're going from a relationship with God and things are vibrant and you're living at peace to you're slipping into apathy, slipping into busyness, getting distracted? What are the signs, the precursors? If you go back to the last time you entered into that cycle and you look what came just before that, are there repeating themes in there that lead you down the way? The best way to avoid the cycle is to avoid the whole thing. Can you see the signs? What are the feelings, the false beliefs, the behaviors, the circumstances that draw you back in again and again? Fear, stress, shame, being overworked, being around certain people, sleeplessness, not exercising. I don't know what it is, but there are precursors, I promise you, if you would just pay attention. And then last, and probably the critical question to this whole thing, do you want to break out of the cycle? Really? So for the Israelites, if they wanted to break out of the cycle, it had to do with getting rid of the Canaanites, removing the Canaanites from their lives. They had to drive them out, but they couldn't, they wouldn't. It cost too much. It was too hard. And at the end of the day, they chose to remain in the cycle because they felt it was easier than to actually change their lives. The same Spirit that filled the judges again and again and again throughout this book and saved the people of God again and again, that same Spirit resides in us. The Spirit that filled the judges now fills us and all who give themselves covenantally to Jesus. Like if you have a relationship with Jesus, then that same Spirit that is in Ehud and Deborah and Samson and Gideon, that Spirit resides in you so that change is not only possible, it is expected, it's commanded, but you have to choose. Are you going to follow the Spirit? Are you willing to take the risk? Are you willing to be courageous? So for me, dealing with the gods of achievement meant that I had to choose to radically reset my life. It meant cutting 15 to 20 hours of work from my week. It meant growing deep in disciplines of daily journaling, Bible reading, prayer. It meant prioritizing my family over my job. Even if it meant that people were going to be deeply disappointed in me, even if it meant that I had to change careers, I had to be open to that, willing to sacrifice those gods, break down those idols in order to give my life entirely and utterly to the God, to Jesus. What about you? What do you choose? Do you want to break out of the cycle? Really?